So, my name's Greg Beales and I'm the campaign director at the Homelessness charity shelter. So, what we're talking about today is one of the really big, often unseen emergencies that's happening in our society at the moment, which is the absolute scandal of homelessness affecting so many people. It's one of the key issues of social justice affecting the country today. A home is so fundamental to everything else someone's going to achieve in their life, whether it's just a good education, or whether it's their family life, or whether it's the ability to hold down a job, get on with their life, build relationships. None of that is possible for someone without a home, and that's why this is a foundational issue for anyone that cares about our society, cares about justice in our society. The housing emergency, as it exists in Britain today, affects people right across the country at the very sharpest end of our economy. The worst effects are probably felt on those who are sleeping rough, and we've all had the experience of seeing people on the streets having to cope with the cold, the elements, often in fact what are life-threatening situations. And any night across the UK is maybe 5,000, 6,000 people sleeping rough. But that really is just the tip of an iceberg of this housing emergency. Any one night, in terms of overall the number of people without a home, without a fixed abode, without somewhere safe and secure to call their own, there's 300,000 people across the country as a whole who are homeless tonight in the country. Including more than 100,000 children. And you can imagine that's not just the short-term effect it has on those people and those families, it's the long-term effect it has on their development and their chances in life. So what's going on? I mean, the thing that strikes me is that every person you meet has their own story about what's happening in their life and how they've got into the situation that they're in. But there are some features underlying all those stories which show that this is a system that is just failing far too many people. What's happened over the last few years? Why have the number of people who are homeless, rough sleeping, number of children in emergency accommodation, why have these numbers all accelerated over the last few years? Well, the sort of short story is that we've had incomes, wages, the money coming in every month has been stagnant or falling. Benefits have been frozen since 2016, for example. So the money people have got coming in has been flat or falling. At the same time, rents, we're largely talking about people renting privately here, rents have risen in some areas of the country very sharply. That creates a big gap between the money people have got coming in and the money going out, and that puts people under pressure. And for every 3 families that are put under that sort of pressure, one will become homeless. And that sort of explains this conveyor belt that's going on of people coming into losing their homes, being unable to get a new one, and moving into homelessness. At the same time, the social housing, this is low cost, government provided, high quality, safe homes. The social housing which previous generations relied on is not being built. So right now, today, 1 million people on the waiting list for a social home. We built only 7,000 new social homes last year. Now when you've got 1 million people waiting and just 7,000 new homes coming in, that just shows you that social housing is not able to play that role of a foundation, a bedrock, a safety net that it's played for previous generations. And what takes up the slack? Well, if you're a family, you end up in bed and breakfasts, emergency accommodation, and yes, that's incredibly expensive as well as being terrible quality. And if you're not a family and you don't have recourse to those sort of protections, far too many people end up on the streets, on floors, in cars and other forms of sleeping rough. One thing that I think surprises people is quite how widespread the problem of homelessness and people losing their homes is. We think of it as something that maybe just affects a small fraction of society, but in fact, in every area of the country, there are children becoming homeless every month. A child loses their home somewhere across the UK every 8 minutes. And it is not just in a handful of sort of urban centres. We're talking about every town, every village, every local authority. So it's an incredibly widespread problem. And if you go to any school, there will be children in it who either are or have been through the experience of losing their home, going into temporary or emergency accommodation. I think the other thing that surprises people, and this has been a big change now over the last 20 years, is most adults becoming homeless are in work when they become homeless. So that basic sort of deal that used to exist, which is that if you had a job, that would probably secure you a solid home. If you go back 30, 40 years, that tended to be true. That's broken down so that far too many people are working but still unable to afford, still unable to have the security of a home. Of course, once you lose your home, it actually becomes much harder to hold on to a job. So of course there's then a lot of pressure on people being able to stay in work, pressure on mental health. Certainly people that are living on the streets are at very high risk of getting involved in substance misuse. But I think increasingly we find as an organisation that these are problems in people's lives that are the result of losing their home, not the cause. I think one of the things that sometimes people will think, but which we think is really a misconception that people have about that problem of homelessness, is that you have to make a whole series of bad choices to lose your home. That people that have lost their home, that have become homeless, it's because they've got, they've done a load of things wrong in their lives. I think when you're talking about so many people and so many families, I think you can start to see that actually it doesn't really take too much for someone to get into difficulty and lose their home. That's particularly true because so many people now are renting privately. And when you rent privately, the costs are higher than social renting. The costs are actually higher than owning your own home, quite considerably higher. And most people renting privately are paying more than 40% of their income every month on the rent. So immediately, if you have any disruption in your income, if you don't get a benefit payment 1 month, if you are working a 0 hours contract and you don't get the hours 1 month, it's very easy to get into a situation where you can't make your rent payment because so many people are living on the edge of what's affordable. And then the other thing about private renting is that it is much easier to be evicted by your landlord than social renting, or certainly if you own your own home. In fact, if you own your own home, banks will increasingly now try to do everything to be able to keep you in that home and give you every opportunity to make a mortgage payment. But private landlords do not offer, in vast majority of cases, that same flexibility. And in fact, even people who are paying their rent on time can be evicted at just 8 weeks' notice. So imagine being a 70-year-old, a 75-year-old, being asked who's renting privately, spent their whole life renting privately, then being asked at just 8 weeks' notice to move out of the property, maybe because the landlord wants to redecorate it. You can see how someone in that situation, who's done nothing wrong, who's done all the things they're supposed to do, could get quite quickly get into difficulty and find it difficult to get another home and get another property. And I think so much of the time what we're seeing is not people who have made mistakes themselves, but who have been let down by a system that leaves no room for error or just the ups and downs of life. Losing your job, ending a relationship, the things that we all have to cope with. Our housing system is not set up to allow people to cope with those things.